Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with the New American, and we have a very special guest with us today. He is a legend when it comes to using data in political campaigns. He's actually served on 5 Republican presidential campaigns, huge numbers of state and federal races, and he also was the director of strategy and data for the 2016 Trump campaign. Now he has relaunched an organization called Look Ahead America. It's a 501c3, and they are trying to turn out voters who don't often vote, but who are patriotic, and also people who are interested in fighting election fraud and restoring election integrity. Matt, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about this data question. Everybody knows, I think, who's been paying any attention to the news, that in 2016, data and the use of data was absolutely critical to the campaign. But for kind of novices out there who don't know what all this means, walk us through a little bit of how you use data in a political campaign in the modern era.
Right. Well, data's been used in campaigns going all the way back to Lincoln's day when he said to make a list of all the voters, ascertain who they are favorable to, and then when the election comes, go out and find all the ones that said they were supporting your candidate and turn them out to vote. That basic model has not changed. The methods of ascertaining who your supporters are and engaging with them has. But the fundamentals are over a century old, if not longer. In 2016, other campaigns I've been involved with, you always start with getting that voter file from the state. That's the arbiter of who's allowed to vote and who is not. And then you start to enhance it with other things, such as what magazines they subscribe to, get an updated phone numbers and updated addresses for them. And more recently, we've moved into the field of psychographic mapping, which attempts to predict how an individual think about certain issues so that you can better tailor a message to them or better determine who among that universe you want to communicate with. With the Trump campaign, we were very successful using psychographic mapping that came from, ironically enough, Barack Obama's former campaign staff. Barack Obama in 2008 was a trailblazer with his data team and their ability to do psychographic mapping, which is basically predicting how somebody's going to think about a particular issue. Everything from whether they're supportive of the police to whether or not they support ride sharing to whether or not they support foreign interventions in wars. So they did that very well in 2008 and again in 2012, and then they left and started a company called Haystack DNA. We relied on that data to make pretty much every decision about whose door we were going to knock on, who we were going to call, who we were going to send mail, and all kinds of other types of targeting throughout the primary, and that continued through the general. So we were able to identify, without even having to really call them, who our supporters were going to be. And then when the election was drawing near, we just pestered the heck out of them to turn them out to vote. We were able to predict with about 70 to 80% accuracy who was going to be inclined to support then candidate Trump. And that was quite miraculous because one thing that separated Trump from the other candidates is that pretty much everybody knew about him and everybody had an opinion about him. We didn't really need to sell the candidate. Other campaigns, and this continues to this day from the campaigns I work on, it's really important to them to be able to penetrate their message to the voters, make them understand what they stand for, and then ascertain whether or not that has been successful in converting that voter to them. With President Trump, because of his tremendous media personality, his tremendous presence then on social media, we didn't have to do that first step. We just had to do the second step. And to help us in that, we were able to use psychographic mapping to predict who was already going to be a supporter of ours. So we could reach out to them and just make sure the ones that were not as likely to vote or who maybe not voted before would turn out. And the best example of that, I would think, is New Hampshire in the primary. President Trump got 100,000 votes there. About 65,000 people turned out to vote who had never before voted in a Republican primary. Now, I'm not
Oh,
saying he got
wow.
all of them. That's who we were targeting to turn out to vote, and that's something that continued in state after state after state. I think that served him very well through the general and even in the 2020 general election.
Wow, that's fascinating, and I want to come back to that when we get back to Look Ahead America. But with you talking about this data issue, it made me think of big tech. I think the election in 2020 was very different than it was in 2016 in terms of conservatives being able to use and organize social media. Did big tech kind of tilt the data field in favor of Democrats and maybe Joe Biden, or was that just an impression that people got in terms of the censorship, in terms of the algorithms they were using? I think a lot of us don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes. Explain the nexus between what you were just describing and where big tech has gone in recent months.
I don't think that they really contributed to the election in that way. I think they contributed to the election in different ways, primarily by funding the left wing's massive voter organization effort to go out into the Democrats' urban central constituency, identify new voters, turn them out to vote after registering them. And that's a very expensive process. And one thing that the tech oligarchs have a lot of is money. And they dump tremendous amount of money into efforts like Stacey Abrams. She never had to beg low dollar donors like I do, and like maybe you guys do too, for contributions to help support their efforts. She basically had these tech giants back up giant dump trucks of cash to her, so that they were paying people to go out into the field and do this work, something like $17 to $22 an hour, which is pretty good for rural Atlanta. Healthcare benefits, paid time off, et cetera, et cetera. So their ability to invest money in turning out and registering their voters over the last 4 years is something that the right has pretty much ignored and done nothing to counter. In fact, that's why my organization is called Look Ahead. I actually started this in 2017 because I knew we had this problem. In fact, in the summer of 2016, before this election, the last thing I did when I was at the Trump campaign office was give then the campaign manager a spreadsheet showing all of the numbers of patriotic Americans in the country that we were able to identify with our data tools who were not yet registered to vote. And my plan for them was to spend the entire summer just on a massive voter registration drive in the areas where we would most likely find our supporters. That never happened. 2016 was a lot closer than it needed to be. And then okay, fast forward 4 years where you have a left wing and a left sort of this ecosystem of left wing organizations between both partisan and nonpartisan organizations, C3, C4s, campaign committees, the DNC, et cetera. They spent pretty much every day for 4 years trying to find every possible voter they could, register them to vote, and then turn them out. After the general election in 2020, I was canvassing neighborhoods in Fulton County, trying to determine whether or not voters really existed or not. It was just, a test. Somebody was interested in doing a test because, when we ran the Voter Integrity Project after the 2020 general election to identify illegal ballots, potential voter fraud, et cetera, and a lot of people were interested in doing analyses that had never been done before. So we actually went door to door through neighborhoods looking for potentially, people who may not have existed or may not have actually voted. But what I found in this is that there were entire neighborhoods that Stacey Abrams registered to vote, educated, and turned out to vote. Now you can guess who they voted for, but I looked these people in the eye, and there was no effort in the right to do this, and this is what Look Ahead America was founded to do. I go to there was before Corona a weekly meeting here in D.C. of all of the top people on the right. It had representatives from the White House, the Senate, every organization that has a presence here in D.C. And at the beginning of every year, I would go up and do a slideshow for Look Ahead America showing how many new progressive voters have been registered in swing states and how many new conservative patriotic voters have been registered. And every year, the deficit got larger and larger and larger to an amount that would almost be insurmountable, even for a fantastic candidate. I give that presentation, and I go to the lobby to talk to people. Nobody want to talk about it because everybody's focused on the hip of the moment, sexy subject matter that basically consumes in one news cycle and then it's over and done. This is the same mindset that leads folks to spend millions of dollars on a campaign ad on the Super Bowl rather than investing in an organization like Look Ahead America, where we're not even trying to get a vote, we're trying to get voters. And the value between investing a tremendous amount of money to get a vote and a voter, it's not even the same ballpark. Investing in creating a new voter is something that pays dividends for generations. It's invaluable. But the right just has no interest or has no serious interest in voter registration efforts. And again, we're called Look Ahead because for the last 4 years, we were foreseeing this problem. And like Paul Revere trying to raise the alarm about it, but nobody heard us. My wife said something kind of funny before the election this cycle. She's She knows my struggles with this organization. She knows how it just has never gotten any oxygen because it's not a sexy topic and the right doesn't understand or value this. She said, well, maybe if Trump loses, then people might understand the importance of what you're trying to do. And I told her, I hope to God that doesn't happen. Well, it did. And I think she's kind of being proven right, because when I talk to people now, they seem to get it. You can't have 4 years with the left dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into voter registration efforts into their core constituencies and do nothing to counter that. Especially when we have the numbers. We have a database of millions of Americans across the country, enough that who are patriotic, who support a patriotic worldview, and who would demand candidates pay attention to patriotic issues. Everything from not intervening to foreign wars to shutting down visa programs that rob us of jobs to traditional values socially, et cetera, et cetera. The whole basically the New American ABS Tucker Carlson strata of issues who are eager for that, but they're not registered to vote, or they registered incidentally and they don't show up. And nobody's in their communities doing community organizing with them to get them engaged. Look ahead, America's trying to be the Stacey Abrams of the right, the acorn of the right. And I think maybe now people are going to pay attention because they see the consequences of neglecting this effort.
That is so fascinating to hear you say all that. And I hear this in Christian circles a lot. We've got all these evangelical Christians, and yet millions of them, maybe more, aren't even registered to vote. If they would all turn out, the right would control politics in the United States. So how do you identify these people? Once you've identified them, how is it that I mean, do you send someone to their door and talk to them? Walk us through what the process looks like. All right, you've got a million people that you think these are conservative leaning people. They'd be inclined to support patriotic, Constitution supporting candidates. What do you do now with that list?
Now, just to be clear, we're a C3. We don't endorse candidates or engage in partisan activity. What we believe is that this country would be much better off if these people voted. If they don't vote, politicians don't pay attention to their issues. And then they think their vote doesn't matter because politicians don't pay attention to their issues. It's a vicious cycle. Speaking to the specifics of how the mechanism works, and is that we are able to identify areas where we believe we have a lot. And again, to be very specific, look at America's wants to register, educate, and turn out to vote, disaffected, patriotic Americans of rural and blue-collar backgrounds. We're able to identify these areas geographically based on basically the demographics that meet what I've articulated. But again, we do have this database of patriotic Americans that we believe have been neglected. And what we arrive at it by basically building a residential database, subtracting the voter data from it. When you subtract that, well, who do you have left? Everybody that's not registered to vote. Now, among those are folks who can't register to vote because they're not citizens or et cetera. But among that, we're able to use our mapping techniques and other things to identify who they are. And with our team, ideally what we're going to be deploying in Virginia and potentially Pennsylvania this year, if we can raise the money, are field offices with staff and volunteers who will, in fact, go door to door. And beyond that, we can do other things too. We can, because we're a C3, we can walk up to the pulpit of a evangelical Hispanic church or any evangelical church and explain to them why it's important they register to vote. We can organize tabling outside high school events or county fairs with messaging and imaging that would draw people who are naturally sympathetic to our causes to us, and then again, register them to vote. And this is the most important part. When we register somebody to vote, that's not the end of our relationship with them. That's the beginning of it, because now we also have their information. So we're able to communicate with them about events we'll have. We can bring in speakers. We can bring in John Birch Society speakers to talk about problems with international issues, et cetera, or other cultural issues to educate these people on, or bring in speakers to talk about the importance of fair play for women. Is that men in skirts shouldn't drive their girls out of the opportunity to get college scholarships. All of these issues, we can bring people in and get these people educated and energized. And then when the election comes, we can release voter guides. We can make sure they know where to vote, how to vote, the different techniques, and turn them out to vote. And this isn't anything new. The left has been doing this for generations. It's just something the right hasn't done and just has not paid attention to or not cared to do. So we're trying to change the culture among this disaffected patriotic group of Americans almost hillbilly, basically hillbilly elegy. That's really who we're aiming at right now. I don't know if you're familiar with that book or not, with J.D. Vance, but that's kind of who we're going after. But we're also having to change the culture of the Republican, I don't want to say Republican, the patriotic conservative donor culture to recognize that this is important. Silly stunts like a super PAC that's going to, build, a real wall on the border that's just going to get torn down by the next administration, spending millions of dollars on that is kind of a waste of money. Why do that when you can reshape the electorate itself so that the government builds that wall for you and secures that wall and make sure it's permanent? So again, we're playing the long game here, as our name implies.
That's really interesting. And one of the things I saw about Virginia, about how they turned Virginia from a pretty conservative red state to a more and more liberal blue state. I guess part of it was you have a lot of people moving in to work for the government living in Northern Virginia, and people who work for the government tend to be more liberal and pro big government. But I've also heard a lot about how they were doing exactly what you just described, registering people that weren't registered to vote, getting them active. And so you think now conservatives and people who kind of love America and maybe want to shrink government a little bit ought to consider similar things. Um, that's incredibly interesting, and I think you're the first person who's articulated it like that. So I appreciate what you're saying, Matt. You mentioned the John Birch Society a couple times. I understand you joined as a young person. Can you explain to us a little bit about how that worked and what your thoughts are?
Sure. So my grandfather, who's no longer with us, who was tremendously influential to me, was a JBS member, and he often had the New American magazines, you know, around his place. When I ever visit, I was always fairly politically inclined. I discovered Rush Limbaugh when I was about 13, and it was like finding a long lost friend. It's like finally somebody who thinks the same way I do. And I remember reading the JBS magazines when they came in because I would get them from his house. I found them to be fascinating. And again, I'm old enough that this is kind of the pre-internet era. So we didn't have everything at our fingertips. And you basically had to read what the local newspaper said, which was a bunch of, I mean, we had one kind of right-leaning paper, one kind of left-leaning paper, and a local paper that, I didn't even have cable in my house growing up, so I didn't have CNN or, back then I think CNN was a little bit different in the mid 90s, not quite the dumpster fire it is today. And there was no MSNBC.
They even
no
aired
Fox
a JBS
News.
documentary one time. So
Right. And you know what else is, one of the things that when I did see cable TV, I would watch is C-SPAN. In the back hall of our Knights of Columbus building, where my mom had an office because she was running, she had an office because she worked for the Girl Scouts in the Knights of Columbus hall, but in the back of the hall there was a television with cable TV, which is, we get to watch cable TV. But anytime I get to watch cable TV, I go right to C-SPAN. It was just absolutely fascinating to see that. But I would read the New American, and I started reading about signing up for a subscription, which includes membership in the John Birch Society. So they sent me the little blue book, and I remember carrying that around, issues of that magazine with me in my little briefcase, because it was one of those 17, 18-year-olds that carried a briefcase, and then went off to college at GW and elsewhere. And, I believe my membership is active now. It kind of, sometimes it lapses. So I just show your audience, look, pay your dues because this stuff is important. And I know that they're somewhat active in this area, and hopefully we'll be able to do some more with the active local chapter around here to, see if there's some interaction between Look Ahead America and what they are. But I would say, yeah, growing up, I kind of had these two influences that, there's the New American JBS, and on the other hand, there was Ayn Rand. And if you fuse them kind of together, you get me.
Huh. That is fascinating. Yeah, that's amazing. And I've seen firsthand the power that a local JBS chapter can have in educating the electorate, and it just naturally happens from there that when the electorate becomes more educated, you kick out congressmen who are inclined to vote for unconstitutional bills, and you get more constitutional congressmen. I've seen it happen. Matt, a lot of people who have been involved in politics, and I know several of these people personally. They're hyper involved in politics. They have now just thrown their hands up. They hate Fox News now because they think Fox News sold them out, and they don't watch anything anymore. They're just, I'm going to go into my bunker. I don't want anything more to do with politics. They rigged the election, and that's it. But you think that there is hope electorally. using this strategy of finding people who have not voted in the past and bringing them in and getting them registered. Walk us through what that looks like. It tells, where can we find Look Ahead America? How can people get involved? And does this mean that it's not going to be, one party rule of liberals forever? What do you think in terms of vote fraud versus registration? Should people be thinking about just giving up now, or is there really a chance of taking back America for pro-Constitution, pro-patriotic values?
Well, again, I want to state that Look at America is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We're a C3, and I treasure that C3 status. We're renewing it now, but I treasure it because it allows us to do a lot of things that others can't. It allows us to be poll watchers. It allows us to, in many states, can't be partisan and do that. It allows us to walk up to the pulpit of a church. It allows us to walk into a high school and all these kinds of things. So, whether one or both parties starts paying attention to our issues, that's up to them. But what we need to do is get our people active, and then it's sort of like when let's say you've got a house plant and you move the light, then the plant sort of moves to face the light. In the same way, by helping to reshape the electorate, by activating these disaffected patriotic Americans, we move the light. So now the politicians will change the direction they look and start paying attention to these issues rather than ignoring these people. Now, I'll say the Democrats basically want these people to go die, and the Republicans occasionally pay lip service to them a little bit sometimes. But if they're organized, then everybody, independent, Democrat, Republican, etc., anybody who wants to win will have to pay attention to their issues. And this is the way we get their voices to echo again in the corridors of power, both in the state capitals and in Washington. So let's talk about voter fraud and illegal ballots. Look at America is incidentally the home of the Voter Integrity Project. We spend a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of resources in the aftermath of the 2020 election, thanks to crowdfunding, to investigate and provide evidence in court cases. Unfortunately, none of it was ever heard in a court case because we never reached trial because of issues of standing or whatever. I'm not a lawyer, and the lawyers weren't working for me, so I don't know all the details. But and we're continuing to work on providing evidence of illegal ballots in the swing states. In fact, our conclusion, we're fortifying this now, is that the number of illegal ballots surpassed the margin of victory in at least 3 states, such that the deserved winner of the presidential election is unknown. That's our line. So the problem with voter fraud is threefold. First of all, is that it happens. And usually it happens in such a way that the margin of victory is enough that it overcomes it. In this case, it just simply wasn't based on our findings. So it affects the outcome of elections. So that's number one, the bad thing. Number two, the bad thing is what you just said, is that it discourages people from voting because they think, oh, my vote doesn't matter. Oh, it doesn't count. What's the point? They're just going to steal it. That is voter suppression. When I started the Voter Integrity Project, we were not intent on finding voter fraud. We just wanted to find what we could find because, look, we had the budget and the resources to run analyses that have never been run before. Pretty much never been run before to detect this, because usually after an election, somebody's won, it's game over and you just move on. But in this case, we were able to look back and see exactly what happened and run some very expensive tests. So because we were able to do that, we wanted to. I was very much hoping that we wouldn't find any voter fraud or any illegal ballots. I wanted to come out and say, look, this didn't have an impact. And in the process of that, I was thinking, well, surely Democrats will support our effort at the Voter Integrity Project because they surely don't want to have a cloud of illegitimacy hanging over Joe Biden's presidency, right? But they weren't interested. And I believe that the issue of voter fraud existing or illegal ballots, and there's some crazy theories out there, and we can talk about those too. But I think that issue actually helps them, because if the conservative, Republican base, et cetera, in this country thinks that elections are illegitimate, they're not going to show up and vote, and that makes it even easier for candidates on the left to win. So that's the second big problem with voter fraud. And then there's a third problem, is that while I did say that the number of illegal ballots overcame the margin of victory in enough states that we don't know who the deserved winner of the election is, that impact is dwarfed by the effort the left made to register, educate, and turn out real voters in so many of these pivotal states. And the problem here is that everybody's focused on illegal ballots and election integrity. That's like the top issue. It was the top issue at CPAC this election. Because of that, it's distracting from what is the much bigger, more important issue, which is the lack of voter education, registration, and turnout on our side in patriotic communities across the country. So again, it contributed. It was determinative, I believe, but it was a very small part of it. A much bigger, 100 to 1,000 times more impactful, was the voter registration, education, turnout efforts on the left, and the absence of that on the right, and the absence of funding to do it on the right.
Wow. So where do people go to get involved, Matt? Say you have somebody watching this who says, "Wow, I'm sold. We got to start registering patriotic Americans who are disaffected to go and vote and get them involved in the political process, so politicians will start paying attention." What do I do now?
We are online at lookaheadamerica.org. We need two things. We need volunteers. There's a volunteer button there. We also need contributions. We are standing at about 10% of the budget we need this year, and we're trying to close that by the end of March. Our field program for Pennsylvania and Virginia, we're projecting the cost about 1.5 to 1.6 million. Right now, our fundraising stands at about 150,000. So we're nowhere close. And I can't call Tom Steyer or George Soros or Mark Zuckerberg or all the guys on the, their check to me hasn't seemed to have arrived yet. Stacy got hers, but I didn't get mine, and I'm not sure if it's coming or not. But and I pitched this program to many of the very big heavy hitters on the right in terms of donors, in terms of even celebrities, and it just hasn't gone anywhere. And what I guess I have to realize is that I've got to count on it's going to have to be small dollar donors. And I love for this to be an entirely volunteer effort. We're doing a lot of work with volunteers. We're fighting for voter integrity reforms in all 50 states right now. In the last month, we trained over 3,000 activists live all over the country on how to lobby their county governments, their state governments, how to organize like-minded people to go apply pressure for legislative reform on election integrity, and how to build coalitions across their state of like-minded organizations, et cetera. And we're providing them with leadership because we're standing up our volunteer coordinators in all of these states to sort of corral our volunteers and put them to work. We've released public policy guidance on voter integrity reforms. We have 6 methods. Basically, these 6 reforms would solve pretty much all of the problems we had in the last election and do a lot to restore confidence. So we've got that effort going on. That's a relatively inexpensive effort, right? But the expensive part is deploying professional staff and field offices, ideally 4 of them in Virginia and 4 in Pennsylvania in key areas, and getting to work. There's an election in Virginia this year. It's very important that these people who have not been voted, not be engaged, get engaged in time, because otherwise everything that matters to them is going to be taken away.
Wow. Serious topic. Matt, thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. Folks, go check it out. Look Ahead America. I know from experience that he is right on the money. I can't tell you how many Christians I know who are not even registered to vote. And you ask them why, and they have, some reason or no reason, but this is a huge issue. There are millions of people who probably think a lot about the world like you do, who are simply not participating in the process. Thank you guys for watching. Please help get this video out. You know as well as I do, YouTube and Facebook are not going to help get this out there by boosting it with their algorithms. So we need your assistance if it's going to get out there. Email it to your friends, email it to your legislators, email it to your county government officials, and email it to your neighbors. This is an important topic, guys. And the future of America and the future direction of America is on the line in all these issues. So thanks again for watching. Matt, thank you once again for being with us, and God bless you all.